Vuvuzela Dawn, 25 sports stories that shaped a new nation, was recently launched at Exclusive Books, and Joburgtoday had the opportunity to speak to co-author Luke Alfred in studio to find out more.
One of the drivers for me as a former sports journalist is that we don't commemorate our heroes very well. Perhaps a little bit politically, but in sports certainly not. And so initially I wanted it to be a book of commemorative portraits, if you like. But there is a certain stuffiness to that. You know, the boredom threshold is present there. So I've always been friendly for the last 20 plus years with an English sports journalist called Ian Hawkey. And we were chewing the fat one day, having a few beers. He was out from the UK, staying with us. And we wanted to finesse that commemorative dimension. And we married it with a storybook, a sporting storybook. And so we got Vuvuzela Dawn.
Now, in navigating the writing of the story, I suppose, were there any obstacles that you had to overcome?
There were lots of obstacles, some of which existed within us, which were, it's painful writing sometimes, and it's painful writing to deadline. But there were logistical obstacles. People refused us access. We approached people. Hashim Amla was not very cooperative. Roland Skuman was not very cooperative. Ivan Koza was not very cooperative. But we're journalists, and journalists are improvisatory, and journalists have a contact book, and journalists are savvy. So where we weren't helped, we went round people.
Any regrets?
For things we don't include in the book. I found myself thinking the Ellis Park soccer tragedy, with that loss of life, should we have included that in the book? Perhaps. Should we have included Oscar Pistorius and disabled sport, which is quite an interesting story. I think the story of disabled sport in this country in the democratic era, as aside from the Oscar Pistorius issue, I think that's a fascinating story, and I think it's a success story. We might have included that. We might have included more individuals in the book, but sometimes we try to smuggle individual stories into team stories. So regrets is possibly overstating it. I think we might have done it differently in a couple of instances, but without coming across as conceited or arrogant. I think we've basically got it right in our choice of subject matter for the 25 chapters.
Well, I'm a great sporting fan of many sports, and I guess this has also transcended an influential period in my life. From being a student in '94 through to the current day, and just brings back many memories of fantastic sporting events and sporting heroes.
It's an obvious milestone, 25 years of sport in a democratic South Africa, which is obviously tremendous. And while many of these stories are out there, they're well known, many of them have only been told superficially. So what this book does is it scratches beneath the surface, and it has the benefit of time and distance. So many of the characters, many of the actors from those days, they now have perspective, they can give context, and they bring a freshness to their story.
For me, it's good. It's very informative, so that we can obviously learn how previously things were done, and learn from our previous, be inspired from a previous sportsman, and take that history through and teach the next generation.
Talking about subject matter, you touch on the aspect of innovation within sport.
Yes.
In the last 25 years. Do
Yes.
you still see that in today's various sporting activities?
That's a good question. I think that innovation played a part in South African sport yesterday. Paul Adams holding a cricket ball. You normally hold a cricket ball like this between these two fingers. Paul Adams holding a cricket ball like that between those two fingers. So the middle finger and the thumb. Very counterintuitive, and then not looking at where he was bowling, putting the head down and did this whirligig motion, and he did it well. He did it well enough to take over 100 test wickets. Benny McCarthy poking the ball through Peter Schmeichel's legs because he knew that Peter Schmeichel had the star jump and he jumped up and it left him very vulnerable on the ground. So what did Benny do? And that kind of I think that kind of improvisation has left South African sport to some extent. We've got sport being semi-professionalized, kids at school getting rugby contracts. And I think that semi-professionalization and later on the professionalization of sport has led to a certain homogenization where the innovation of people like Benny and Paul Adams has perhaps been left behind a little bit. And I don't necessarily think that's an entirely good thing.
Where does the relevance of the book then lie in today's discussion around sports?
The relevance of the book is that I, as a man of my age in his 50s, lived through something called the Rebel Tours in unofficial sport. Okay, that lasted 10 or 12 years and was deeply unsatisfactory. South Africa got reabsorbed into the family of nations in the early 90s, shortly before the first democratic elections in 1994, and this book is celebratory. It tells 25 sporting stories which are congruent with the period 1994 to 2019. And there have been some fabulous stories. And it's a story about being a prideful South African. Whether it's Josiah Tugwani winning the gold medal in the men's marathon at Atlanta in 1996, or whether it's a group of no-hoper rowers who finished almost last in the World Championships of the preceding year, winning gold in London in the lightweight coxless fours in 2012, and being mistaken for Australians in doing so.
Now, in terms of journalism, sports journalists to be more precise, what does this book do for them?
Without wanting to appear to be too arrogant, it kind of raises the bar. And it says, this is what we should be doing, and these are the stories we should be writing. And pay attention, and enjoy yourself, and revisit these wonderful moments while you can.
I'm John Terode, and you're watching Joburg Today.